Since time immemorial, human beings have regarded symbols as living gateways. Some go unnoticed, others echo within us like an ancient whisper, as if they have always been there. The rose, in particular, emerges not as a mere flower, but as a silent revelation. Entwined in the tapestry of major spiritual traditions, it is more than beauty. It is a hidden call that few can hear, but transforms the soul of those who recognize it. In its simplicity, the rose harbors a profound enigma, as its scent and form conceal veiled truths about the sacred, suffering, unconditional love, and eternal wisdom. There is something in the rose that resonates with the human heart, as if each petal knew the deepest pains and desires of the soul. She presents herself as a symbol in temples, dreams, texts, and in the visions of mystics. Amid thorns and gentleness, her form reveals the paradoxes of existence. To the initiated, the rose is not a flower, but a verb. It speaks through silence, a language without words that reveals the presence of the divine, especially when the human heart is prepared. At the beginning of this journey, we are not seeking logical answers. We seek to rediscover a forgotten memory, that of the rose that lives in the hidden center of our being, waiting to bloom. The rose appears to those who dare to dive beyond the surface and enter a space where faith and wisdom walk together. The first signs of this symbol appear long before institutionalized Christianity. It blossoms in ancient myths as a manifestation of the sacred feminine, of the healing beauty, of the pain that reveals light. Cultures such as Persian, Egyptian, Hindu, and Greek already spoke of the rose as a bridge between worlds. It was not just any flower, it was a spiritual offering. In Greek mythology, for example, Aphrodite is born from the waters, and with her, the rose emerges as an expression of the union between earthly love and the divine. For the Persians, the white rose would turn red when dyed by the blood of the soul in love with God. What's striking is the persistence of the symbol over the millennia. It has survived empires, wars, era changes, always veiled, but never erased. When early Christianity began to emerge, the rose was already a symbol laden with meanings. With the coming of Christ, it took on a new dimension. No longer just a symbol of human love, but of redeeming love. The rose then became a reflection of Christ's heart, a center that bleeds but does not close, a core that pulses with wisdom, mercy, and surrender. However, this association did not come about by chance. It was through contemplation and mystical experience that the early Christians perceived the silent presence of the rose in spiritual life. Often veiled in apocryphal writings or in the works of persecuted mystics, it represented the internal revelation, the one that could not be openly expressed in formal religious structures. The rose then became the symbol of the unspoken, of the truth protected by silence. Not surprisingly, it began to be used as a code among initiates, as a way to convey the presence of the hidden kingdom without drawing the attention of oppressors. Among the Gnostics, for example, the rose was the sign of the awakening of the divine spark within man. It was the symbol of Sophia, the divine wisdom, in bloom. For them, the rose does not bloom in the external world, but in the secret garden of the soul. Only when the being returns within itself, in silence and reverence, does it blossom. It is not something that imposes itself, but rather reveals itself. The symbol is alive and responds to the degree of consciousness of the observer. And this is precisely what makes the rose so powerful. It is not only a symbol, it is an inner experience. The alchemists later on reclaimed this understanding and expanded it. For them, the rose represented the final stage of the great work, the moment when the lead of the soul transforms into spiritual gold. Each petal was a degree of initiation, an inner achievement, a stage overcome on the journey towards unity. But before reaching the golden rose, the seeker needed to face the labyrinth, cross the dark night, surrender their ego, and be reborn. That's why the rose was almost always surrounded by thorns, because the path of light requires courage, truth, and renunciation. And here we return to the central point. The rose is a symbol that awakens, not just admiration, but inner movement. When it appears in our dreams, readings, or meditations, it's as if it's saying, "The time has come. The moment has arrived to go beyond appearances, to leave behind the distractions of the world, to turn towards the center." The rose doesn't shout, it calls in whispers, and those who listen rarely remain the same. It is the echo of the soul crying out for union with the eternal. It is Christ whispering through beauty. Throughout history, poets, mystics, and visionaries have become their spokespersons. Dante, Rumi, Hildegard, Teresa, they all saw the rose and tried to describe it. But no word is enough, because it doesn't fit into logic. It's an experience that happens in the innermost being, something that can't be forced or understood, only welcomed. The rose is God's language for those who have learned to listen with their heart. In this video, we don't just want to explain the symbol. We want to experience it. The proposal is not intellectual, it's initiatory. Each word here will be like a petal offered to you. Each idea, a necessary thorn for blooming. And if you follow through to the end, something within you might bloom as well. Because true knowledge is not acquired, it is remembered. And the symbol of the rose has been etched into every soul since the dawn of time. The rose does not belong to a religion, culture, or doctrine. It transcends all of that. It's a reminder that there's something more, that there is a hidden kingdom, a sacred place within us, waiting to be rediscovered. And the key to this kingdom is in the rose. It points to Christ, to Sophia, to the higher love that sustains the universe. And this love is calling you now. The journey has just begun. The symbol has been revealed, the call has been made, and the rose has already started to bloom within you. In Christian tradition, the symbol of the rose blooms in a veiled and sacred manner, like a silent reflection of the mystery of Christ. It does not appear in the scriptures explicitly, but infiltrates the images, prayers, stained glass of cathedrals, and the chants of devotees as a living and symbolic presence. The rose, in this context, becomes more than a flower. It is the expression of divine love that bleeds, that sacrifices, that redeems. The pierced heart of Christ is often associated with the red rose, a symbol of pain and redemption. The rose is not just an ornament, it is a coded message, mystical language, a celestial code that echoes in the mysteries of Calvary and the resurrection. Among the Church Fathers, the rose emerges as an emblem of spiritual purity, redemptive passion, and the promise of eternal glory. St. Ambrose, for example, said that God's garden is adorned with roses, where each one represents a soul purified by faith and love. For St. Augustine, the rose was a symbol of beatitude, of the soul that completely surrenders to the divine will. This spiritual blossoming is portrayed with reverence, as each petal represents a virtue earned through effort, prayer, and surrender. Thus, the rose becomes the sign of the Spirit that, amidst the thorns of the world, chooses the path of light. The symbolism of the Marian rose is one of the oldest and most potent in Christianity. Mary, the mother of Christ, is referred to as the mystical rose, the one who bloomed amidst the desert of fallen humanity. She is the white rose of purity, but also the red one of silent pain that accompanies her son to the cross. Over the centuries, prayers such as the Litany of Loreto have consecrated this title. The Marian rose unites compassion and spiritual power, sweetness and firmness, being revered as the enclosed garden where the divine became flesh. In her presence, the rose symbolizes the spiritual womb, the place where the Word became flower. The medieval mystical tradition took this image to new heights. Mystics such as Saint Bernard of Clairvaux and Hildegard von Bingen wrote about the symbolism of the rose as a manifestation of divine wisdom embodied in the world. To them, the rose represented the mystery of the Incarnation, God, the Absolute, becoming human, finite, and vulnerable. The birth of Christ was compared to a rose blooming in winter, defying the world's seasons. This image provoked deep emotion as it showed that divine love does not wait for ideal conditions to manifest. It blooms in the cold of darkness, in the silence of the cave, amidst human pain. Christ, in turn, is symbolized as the red rose of Golgotha. In mystical symbolism, the cross is the stem, and the rose is the fruit that blooms at the peak of sacrifice. The intense red color represents the blood of redemption, but also the burning love that gives itself unreservedly. In this sense, the rose becomes the purest expression of crucified love, love that seeks no retribution, but only to heal and redeem. In many ancient icons, the heart of Jesus is depicted as an open, radiant rose from which light and mercy flow to all creation. The Cistercian monks, spiritual heirs of Bernard of Clairvaux, developed a theology of the rose in their writings and liturgical practices. For them, contemplating the rose was akin to contemplating the soul in union with God. The monastic garden, where roses and other flowers grew, was seen as a sacred space for meditation and prayer, where the symbol could be experienced, not just understood. There, the rose taught about the right time to bloom, about the value of silence, and about the mystery of pain as a catalyst for true love. In times of religious persecution, the rose also served as a secret symbol among persecuted Christians. Engraved in stones, hidden in manuscripts, or discreetly carved into the walls of catacombs, it represented fidelity to inner truth even in the face of death. The rose was the flower of martyrs, the sign that the kingdom of God flourished amidst the desert of oppression. With each soul that offered its life for the love of Christ, a new invisible rose was born in the heavenly garden. The flower became a silent witness to unwavering faith and the promise of resurrection. It's no coincidence that the rosary, one of the most powerful prayer tools in the Catholic tradition, has this name. It is a garden of spiritual roses offered to the Virgin Mary. Each Hail Mary is like a petal. Each contemplated mystery is an open flower before the divine throne. The repetition of prayers, far from being mechanical, is intended to purify, center, and elevate the soul. In this sense, the rosary is an alchemical practice. It transforms the raw matter of the scattered mind into crystalline consciousness. The rose is, once again, the symbol of the soul in a state of prayer. The symbolism of the rose has perpetuated itself powerfully in sacred art. In many Gothic cathedrals, especially the French ones, we see the rose window, a circular stained glass that represents the spiritual cosmos, with Christ at the center and the saints around, like petals of a celestial flower. This image is not merely decorative, it is a visual representation of the kingdom of God, of the divine order, of beauty as a reflection of eternity. The light that passes through the rose window transforms into color and shape, revealing the sacred within the visible. Each ray of light becomes a silent message to the heart of the attentive observer. During the Baroque period, this symbolism gained even more emotional depth. The rose began to be depicted in paintings of saints, especially in ecstatic visions of Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, who said, "I will spend my heaven raining roses upon the earth." For her, each rose was a granted grace, a silent blessing that descended from above to touch hearts thirsty for meaning. The rose then became a bridge between worlds, a gesture of divine tenderness, an expression of providence that acts even without being seen. We must not forget also the mystical representations of the rose in Eastern Christian mysticism. In Hesychast writings and the tradition of Mount Athos, the rose is a symbol of the praying heart, of the inner silence that blossoms in union with the Holy Spirit. Hesychasm teaches that, by devoutly repeating the Jesus prayer, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner," the human heart begins to bloom like a rose of light. This blooming is not emotional but spiritual. It is the fruit of persistence, of renunciation of the ego, and of surrender to the mystery. The rose, therefore, is more than a symbol. It is a path, an invitation, a silent presence that accompanies the soul that chooses truth. Between thorns and light, it teaches us that the love that truly transforms is the one that surrenders. And that, at the heart of the Christian tradition, the rose is not just memory or beauty. It is Christ himself, blossoming eternally in the secret garden of the awakened soul. And what John, James, and Mary received now echoes in the souls that are ready to awaken. The book is being opened, and the first pages are beginning to whisper again. Before the rose became a symbol of Christ's redeeming love, it was already blooming in the sands of time, in the temples of ancient Egypt, in the wisdom schools of the East, and in the silent mysteries of the initiates. Long before Christianity emerged as a spiritual expression of the West, the rose was already known by seekers from the Middle East and North Africa as a sacred icon, an expression of the cosmic soul, a mirror of creation. The symbol of the rose crosses civilizations and presents itself as a hidden truth encoded in myths, engravings, and rituals. Its fragrance, like that of true wisdom, does not impose itself. It subtly permeates the air of the soul, transforming the one who perceives it. In ancient Egypt, the rose was associated with the goddess Isis, the great initiating mother, the one who knows the secrets of death and life. Isis represented the elevated soul, the feminine force that, even amidst the desolation of loss, rebuilds, regenerates, and rescues. She gathers the shattered pieces of Osiris, restores his life, and, with that, becomes the guardian of spiritual rebirth. The rose, in this context, was offered as a symbol of the mystery of eternal love and the profound wisdom that pierces through the veil of illusion. In temples dedicated to Isis, it was common to find floral representations in the form of spirals and mandalas, reminiscent of the open rose, the center that never closes. The geometry of the rose was seen as a map of creation. The ancient Egyptians understood that the universe was not random chaos, but an ordered manifestation with precise laws and cosmic rhythms. The rose symbolized this invisible order, the hidden harmony behind life's contrasts. Each petal represented a stage in the soul's journey towards enlightenment. Just like the lotus, the rose was a symbol of ascension, but its delicacy conveyed another kind of strength, the power of deep love, which overcomes without violence, which transforms without dominating. In the Hermetic papyri, which would later inspire the alchemists and philosophers of the West, the rose was mentioned as a symbol of the spirit that remembers. For the disciples of Hermes Trismegistus, the rose was not just a flower, it was a verb. It was a verb descending from the divine mind and manifesting in matter with the mission to awaken. Hermes, considered the messenger of the gods and the patron of hidden wisdom, taught that everything in the universe has correspondence, and the rose was, for the initiates, the symbolic representation of the soul in balance, centered, beautiful, receptive, and silent. The Egyptian mystery schools held secrets only shared with those who were ready. This knowledge was initiatory, not theoretical. The initiate had to undergo tests, purifications, rites of symbolic death and rebirth to then understand the symbols. The rose was only revealed at the end of the journey as a gift to the reborn soul, and not as an object to be idolized, but as a living reminder of the divine presence hidden in everything. The rose represented the heart of the temple, not physical, but spiritual. With the conquest of Greece over Egypt and the fusion of cultures, the rose migrated to Hellenic myths and began to carry new meanings without losing its sacred root. In Eleusis, where the mysteries of Demeter and Persephone taught about death and the rebirth of the soul, the rose was incorporated as a symbol of return to light. Those who went through the secret rites of Eleusis claimed they no longer feared death, for they had contemplated the eternal. The rose, in this context, symbolized this moment of revelation, when the soul, after descending to the underworld, is reborn with a new perspective. In the Orphic tradition, which deeply influenced the early Gnostic Christians, the rose appeared in poetry and songs as a sign of purity and connection with the divine. Orphism taught that the human soul is a prisoner of the body and must free itself through purification, music, beauty, and transcendent love. On this path, the rose emerged as a silent companion, a flower that blooms in the silence of contemplation. Later on, the Neoplatonists inherited this ancient wisdom and conveyed it in the form of spiritual philosophy. Plotinus, a disciple of Ammonius Saccas and a profound connoisseur of the Egyptian tradition, taught about the ascent of the soul to the higher planes. To him, the rose was a symbol of the soul that remembers the source, that spirals upward to the unity, to the absolute good. In his Enneads, Plotinus spoke of the gaze of the One, and many identified this gaze with the silent center of an open rose, which sees all and understands all without judging. This same symbol was absorbed by Renaissance Hermetic schools, which sought to reclaim the wisdom of ancient Egyptian, Chaldean, Persian, and Hindu masters. The rose began to be carved into the portals of hidden libraries, painted in secret paintings, and described in treatises that mixed astrology, alchemy, and theurgy. Each rose drawn was a key, a seal, a call. It was not just art, it was a spiritual coding that spoke to the awakened soul. In Kabbalah, whose mystical root also draws from ancient Egyptian and Babylonian traditions, the rose appears implicitly in the tree of life. The heart's center, Tiferet, is often associated with the sun, beauty, balance, and love. It's at this point that the rose blooms, as a symbol of harmony between mercy and rigor, between heaven and earth, between the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. The rose is, then, the heart of the tree, the center where light descends and takes form. Over time, the rose became a living bridge between traditions. What started in the rituals of Isis, in the temples of Karnak, in the visions of the initiates of the Upper Nile, continued in the chants of the Orphics, in the meditations of the Neoplatonics, in the Hermetic treatises, and finally, in the hands of the early Christian mystics. The symbol adapted but did not lose its essence. The rose has always indicated the same path: the return to the center, union with the divine, the remembrance of who we are beyond form. Thus, the rose is not just a flower, symbol, or ornament. It is a legacy, a silent echo of the civilizations that heard the call of the spirit, an encoded language that remains alive, waiting for the right moment to be revealed in the heart of every being who dares to search deeper. It is the rose of Egypt, Greece, Chaldea, India, Persia, and all the places where the human soul looked to the sky and asked, "Where did I come from? Where do I return to?" The rose answers without words, it just blooms. The rose, which for centuries walked among myths and mysteries, found in the Rosicrucian movement one of its most intense, secret, and revealing expressions. There, amidst encrypted manifestos, initiatory treaties, and rituals protected by the veil of anonymity, the rose became the heart of a doctrine that unites faith, science, art, alchemy, and philosophy. The Rosicrucian Brotherhood emerged in the silence of the 17th century, but its foundations trace back to the mystery schools of Egypt, the wisdom of the Essenes, the Hermetic traditions, and the living soul of Christian Gnosticism. Its members did not found stone temples, they founded spaces of consciousness. And the rose was placed at the center of the invisible altar of each initiate, not as an ornament, but as the living flame of the inner divine presence. According to the Rosicrucian manifestos, Fama Fraternitatis, Confessio Fraternitatis, and the alchemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, the fraternity was founded by a sage who, after journeying through various Eastern and Arab traditions, returned to Europe bringing a new spiritual synthesis. This character, Christian Rosenkreutz, was more than a historical figure. He was an archetype of the perfect initiate, one who sought truth with humility, practiced charity in silence, and died in secret, leaving as an inheritance not a body, but a timeless teaching. And on this tomb, a rose bloomed. In the Rosicrucian tradition, the rose represents the soul in its state of glorification, while the cross symbolizes matter, suffering, incarnation. To unite the two is to accomplish the great work, the fusion of spirit with flesh, of the eternal with the transient, of the high with the low. This sacred marriage is the ultimate goal of the Rosicrucian path, and it is not achieved through dogmas, but through direct experience, through inner transmutation. The cross is not seen as punishment, but as an alchemical tool. The rose is not a reward, but the manifestation of the regenerated being. The secret of the Rosicrucians was not in the books, but in the silent living of the principles. They sought direct knowledge of nature, the soul, and God. The rose symbolized the heart of the seeker, which, purified of vanities, becomes a receptacle of divine wisdom. In their writings, they spoke of a rose on its cross and a cross on its rose, indicating that suffering is not an end, but a means. The rose is born from the blood of sincere effort. There is no true enlightenment without symbolic death. And that is why the tomb of Rosenkreutz remains closed to the curious and only opens for the pure of heart. The Rosicrucian symbolism is deeply intertwined with spiritual alchemy. In alchemical texts and images, the rose appears as a golden flower, as the fruit of the union between the sun and the moon, as the result of the dissolution of the ego and the elevation of consciousness. The alchemical process is not physical, but soulful, calcining lower desires, dissolving vanity, baking patience, distilling wisdom, and coagulating higher love. In the end, the rose is the symbol of the soul that has passed through the fire of transformation and has become a temple of the divine. The Rosicrucians also saw the rose as an expression of sacred science. They studied the stars, numbers, elements, and plants, not as isolated objects, but as manifestations of the One. The rose, with its spiral shape, expresses the sacred geometry present in all creation. Each petal reveals a symmetry that is not random. It is a reflection of universal harmony. When contemplating a rose, the initiate did not see just a flower, but a map of the cosmos, a symbolic key to understanding higher laws. Anonymity was another essential characteristic of the Rosicrucians. They did not seek personal glory, ecclesiastical positions, or recognition. They operated in secret, often assuming discrete roles in society while practicing their spiritual and scientific disciplines. This radical humility was the fertile ground where the rose bloomed. The soul that empties itself can be filled with the light from above, and it is in this soil of detachment that the rose achieves its purest form, fragrant, discreet, eternal. In various esoteric works, the rose symbolizes the center of the being, that which, even when everything falls, remains. It is the still point in the heart of movement, the silent eye in the center of the storm. The Rosicrucians cultivated this inner rose through silent prayer, contemplation, altruistic service, and the sincere pursuit of knowledge. The rose then became visible, not to the eyes of the world, but to the spiritual vision awakened by purity of intention. The Rosicrucian path is also the path of balance. It does not reject the world, but purifies it. It does not deny reason, but transcends it with the heart. The rose blooms at the center of the cross because that is the point of union between all forces. Between the extremes of pain and joy, of heaven and earth, of the visible and the invisible, there is a point of light, and it is there that the rose opens. The search is not for escape, but for integration. And the rose is the sign that this integration has been achieved. The Rosicrucians bequeathed to humanity an ideal: to live with wisdom, love deeply, and serve with humility. They believed that the world could be healed not by wars, but by knowledge and compassion. Therefore, in their writings, we find the hope of a universal renewal, a new birth of humanity. The rose, in this future, would be the standard of the new era, an era where science and spirituality, masculine and feminine, matter and spirit walk together. In the hearts of the true Rosicrucians, there was no superiority, only service. The rose taught that all knowledge must transform into compassion, and all enlightenment must lead to caring for others. Each initiate was a gardener of the human soul, helping others find their own inner rose, and this was done in silence, without fanfare, without proselytizing, only with loving presence and lived wisdom. The rose cross, therefore, is not just an esoteric symbol, it is an eternal invitation, a call that echoes in the hearts of those who feel there is something beyond the visible world. It reminds us that the cross of life can bloom, that suffering can become light, that knowledge can be love, and that, even in the darkest times, the rose continues to grow, silently, in the hidden garden of the awakened spirit. At the hidden core of every human being lies a sacred garden, not made of earth or visible leaves, but of silence, depth, and inner light. In this secret and inviolable space, a unique rose grows, alive, conscious, the rose of the heart, symbol of the soul in its highest state, representation of the divine spark seeking to manifest itself through flesh, emotion, and purified mind. The rose in this garden is not a metaphor, it is real, and it blooms with every act of genuine love, every gesture of surrender, every renunciation of the ego in favor of truth. This rose does not impose itself, but waits. It waits for the soul to return to its center, and recognize it as part of itself. It is at this junction between the visible and the invisible that spiritual alchemy comes into play, the science of soul transformation. The ancient alchemists, often misunderstood by those who were only seeking material riches, were in fact engaged in deep work with the inner forces of the being. They spoke of the great work, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life. But all of this, when understood with the eyes of the spirit, pointed to a single reality: the transmutation of the lower being into a luminous being, from the raw metal of the personality into the pure gold of Christ consciousness. The rose represented for them the final outcome of this great work, the visible manifestation of spiritual perfection in the physical world. But for this rose to bloom, it was necessary to go through all the phases of the alchemical process, which was not done in ovens and tubes, but in the internal laboratory of the soul. The first stage was the nigredo, the dark night, the initial chaos, the inner disorder. It was when the soul recognized its fragmentation, its illusions, its inflated ego, and its unhealed wounds. The rose, at this point, was still a dormant seed in the dark soil. Next came the albedo, the purification. The soul, through sincere pain and loving discipline, began to dissolve its attachments, to clear its perception, to seek the essential. Like petals slowly opening at sunrise, the rose began to breathe, still shy, still fragile, but already alive. The heart, as it opened, let in the breath of the spirit, and the rose responded with life. The internal alchemist learned that all suffering was not punishment, but preparation, every loss a disguised liberation. Citrinitas, the subsequent stage, signified the emergence of inner wisdom, of elevated discernment. The rose began to emit light, no longer just beauty. The fragrance of the regenerated soul touched everything around. The initiate no longer sought for themselves, but offered their presence as a balm for others. The rose now ceased to be a promise to become an offering. Its fragrance was not a display, but a revelation of the divine presence acting through the purified human heart. Finally, the rubedo, the blush, the fire of the spirit consummating the total union. The heart became an altar, and the rose fully opened, revealing its most intimate core, where there was no more I, but only the one. The rose became an internal sun, a point of light that radiated healing, wisdom, and silent love. At this point, the transmutation was complete. The rose in the garden of the heart was now visible, indestructible, eternal. It was the sign that the divine had found full dwelling in the human soul. This process, far from being linear, is organic, cyclical, and personal. It cannot be forced or rushed. The rose does not respond to the will of the ego, but to the surrender of the soul. It blooms at its own pace, often in moments of great pain, when all seems lost. It is in these moments that the shell of the ego breaks and light finds cracks to enter. The rose, as the secret center of being, responds to the call of truth, not to the pressure of spiritual performance. Mystics from all eras have described this process in symbolic terms. St. John of the Cross spoke of the dark night of the soul, when everything is taken away so that the true light can emerge. Rumi described the heart as a field where pain digs the space that will be filled by love. Teresa of Avila spoke of the interior castles, where the deepest center was inhabited by God. And all of them, even without saying it directly, were talking about the rose, this silent presence that waits in the core of being, guarding the mystery of transfiguration. In the Sufi tradition, the garden of the heart is cultivated with zikr, the constant remembrance of the divine name. Each repetition is a drop of light that irrigates the inner soil. And when the divine presence becomes continuous, the rose blooms. The heart becomes fragrance. The entire being transforms into an offering. What was fragmented unites. What was shadow illuminates. And the rose, once again, is the visible witness of this invisible transformation. For Kabbalists, the rose is associated with the Sephira Tiferet, beauty, harmony, balance. Tiferet is the point of union between the pillars of severity and mercy, between the dynamic and receptive aspects of manifestation. The rose at this point represents the soul in perfect balance, where there is no longer struggle, only synthesis. The rose is not static, it pulses with the universe, and the heart that cultivates it resonates with cosmic rhythms. The inner garden where the rose grows needs to be protected. In modern times, filled with distractions, noise, and empty stimuli, it's easy to forget that this space exists. But it remains there, intact, waiting to be rediscovered. Each profound silence, each sincere act of kindness, each silent renunciation of the ego is a drop of water in this garden. The rose doesn't bloom with techniques, but with truth. And every soul that turns to itself, with sincerity and courage, finds this garden and becomes its own alchemist. The rose in the heart center doesn't belong to any religion or school. It is universal. It is the same rose that bloomed in the heart of Christ, Buddha, Krishna, and so many anonymous saints. It is the rose of the Spirit, which chooses to dwell in the humble, the pure, the vigilant. When it blooms, there are no doubts. The gaze changes, the presence heals, the touch transforms. The rose doesn't need to say anything. It simply is. And to be at this level is the greatest miracle of the awakened soul. Therefore, every true spiritual path is, at its core, a cultivation of the inner rose, a process of transforming wounds into windows, falls into steps, losses into gateways, and the rose, in its silent simplicity, is the most faithful guide. It shows that the path is not to run away from life, but to transmute it, that the real alchemy occurs when the human heart becomes a mirror of the divine, that the scent of the rose does not come from technique, but from surrender, and that the great work is happening now within you. The rose, in its highest expression, reveals not only a symbol of transformation, but the very archetype of superior love, one that transcends fleeting passions, breaks through the limitations of human desire, and anchors in a love that heals, reconciles, and unifies. This love, in the deepest mysteries of spiritual tradition, is the union of two eternal presences, Christ and Sophia. He, the manifestation of the divine Logos, the incarnate Word. She, the primordial wisdom, the silent mother of cosmic understanding. Together, they form the center of the inner rose, the essence of the enlightened heart, the presence that transforms the human soul into a living expression of the divine. Christ did not come into the world solely to redeem, but to reveal. His mission was to restore the connection between humanity and the One, between time and eternity. His love was not sentimental, but vibrational, a living frequency capable of crossing dimensions, dissolving densities, and opening portals within the self. The rose he represents is made of light and blood, of compassion and truth, of total surrender and supreme consciousness. It never closes, for it symbolizes love that gives itself completely, even in the face of betrayal, pain, abandonment. Sophia, in turn, is the feminine dimension of this love. She does not shine like the sun, but like the full moon that reflects divine light in its purest and most serene form. She is the cosmic womb where the Logos is generated. In Gnostic texts, Sophia is not just wisdom. She is the matrix of all creation, the hidden thought of God, the eternal rose that, even fallen into the lower worlds, never lost its original beauty. Her path is one of silent compassion, of welcoming wisdom, of truth that waits without judgment. The union between Christ and Sophia is the fusion of the active and receptive principles of the universe. This union does not take place in external temples, but within the awakened soul. When the love of Christ meets the wisdom of Sophia within the heart, the higher love is born, the inner rose that pulses at the center of being. This rose is not just symbolic. It is a living presence, a core of consciousness that expands into light, into silence, into profound peace. It is the answer to all searches, the relief from all pain, the return to a home that was never lost, just forgotten. The ancient mystics understood that this love can only be accessed through radical surrender. It's not about understanding with the mind, but allowing with the heart. The ego, with its fears and expectations, cannot reach the inner rose. Only the surrendered spirit can touch its essence, and once touched, it never returns to being the same. Everything reorganizes, priorities change, relationships transform, and life begins to be guided not by control, but by listening. This love does not impose, it attracts. It does not demand, but invites. It's like the scent of a rose. It does not announce itself, but spreads. And those who breathe it in feel something they cannot explain, only recognize. Christ in this love is not the character of religion, but the living principle of totality, of return to unity. Sophia, equally, is not just a concept, but a vibrational reality that teaches, corrects, and nourishes in silence. Both live in the human heart, and the rose is their language. In practice, this means that every human being has within them a fusion point between heaven and earth. This point is the awakened heart, and it blossoms when love becomes service, when knowledge transforms into wisdom, when forgiveness replaces judgment. The internal rose does not grow from pride, but from humility. It does not grow with accumulation, but with surrender. And every action made with pure intention waters this rose with invisible light. Renaissance mystics knew this. Jacob Boehme, for example, said that the rose is the symbol of the magical center of being, where God is born within man. He spoke of an inner Christ that does not belong to a religion, but is the very divine spark waiting to be awakened. And this Christ only reveals himself when the soul unites with eternal wisdom, with Sophia who enlightens, not with theories, but with loving understanding. The inner rose also represents the reconciliation of opposites. Within us dwell conflicting forces, reason and emotion, light and shadow, masculine and feminine. When these forces go to war, the heart closes. But when they are welcomed and harmonized, the rose blooms. Higher love does not eliminate opposites, it unites them into a third element, conscious compassion. At this point, there is no more separation. Everything is seen as part of the one. Eastern traditions also speak of this inner rose. In Buddhism, it manifests as the lotus flower, which is born from the mud but remains uncontaminated. In Hinduism, it is the heart chakra, the anahata, depicted as a 12-petaled flower, the center of devotional love. In all these traditions, the spiritual center of the being is described as a flower, a symbol of the open, receptive soul, aligned with the divine. And all these flowers point to the same reality, the heart as the temple of the supreme union. In the present time, the call for this love is urgent. The world spins between extremes, between fear and desire, noise and scarcity, separation and competition. But the inner rose remains there, intact, waiting to be noticed. The superior love does not hide, it merely respects. It waits for the soul to tire of illusions and desire something more real. And when this sincere desire emerges, even amidst the chaos, the rose begins to bloom. The rose is the language of higher love because it does not harm. Even surrounded by thorns, it does not hurt. It teaches, it reveals, it transforms. And each soul that awakens this love within itself becomes a point of light in the world, a silent beacon, a living balm, and life ceases to be survival to become an offering. Because where there is a rose, there is Christ. Where there is wisdom, there is Sophia. And where the two meet, there is higher love. Eternal, present, alive. There is a place where words do not reach, where the sound of the world ceases and only silence remains. In this inner space, which cannot be located in time or space, there is a hidden kingdom, a domain of pure presence, where the rose of the Spirit blooms in its purest form. This kingdom is not found in temples built by human hands, nor in the dogmas of established religions. It dwells in the deep silence of the awakened heart, accessible only to those who have learned to listen to what is not said, to see what is not shown, and to remember what has never been forgotten. Throughout history, this hidden kingdom has been guarded by initiates, men and women who, in silence, walked among the people as living points of light. They did not identify themselves by clothing or titles, but by a subtle presence, an inexplicable peace, a gaze that penetrated the deepest layers of being. These initiates did not speak of the rose, they embodied it. They did not discourse about the mystery, they lived it in every gesture, in every choice, in every silence filled with meaning. The rose in this context is the key to the hidden kingdom. It represents that which only blooms away from curious eyes, on the sacred ground of the unseen. The ancients knew that what is sacred is not exposed. Therefore, the rose was always associated with secrecy, confidence, the pact of silence. The Latin phrase sub rosa, under the rose, was used in initiatory orders to indicate that something had been revealed in confidence, never to be profaned by vulgar speech. The rose, thus, became the seal of truth that is only shared with those who can comprehend it. In the Egyptian, Greek, Essene, and Gnostic mysteries, silence was more than the absence of sound. It was a method, it was a state, it was an indispensable condition for listening to the divine. The initiate was trained not to speak, but to listen, not to repeat formulas, but to access the living source of direct knowledge. And what they heard in this silence was the pulse of the inner rose, the sound of the universe resonating within the purified heart. This sound cannot be described, but whoever hears it never returns to live as before. The masters of the hidden kingdom did not seek followers, they sought the awakened. They knew that knowledge without preparation is noise, and that truth offered to those who do not deeply desire it becomes just another distraction. Therefore, they hid themselves in symbolic language, in metaphors, in myths, in parables. The rose as a symbol was the veil and the mirror. It concealed the mystery and at the same time revealed it to those who knew how to look. Each petal was a layer of meaning, and the center of the flower, a core of silent presence. In Rosicrucian traditions, this hidden kingdom was called the sanctum internum, the inner sanctuary, a space of light inaccessible to the ego, but always available to the sincere soul. In this sanctuary, the rose was not seen, but experienced. The rose was prayer in the form of presence, wisdom in the form of silence, love in the form of light. The initiate who entered this kingdom knew they had crossed a definitive threshold. From that point forward, the external world lost its power, and the only direction was inward. The rose in the silence of the initiated also represents the language of the spirit. A language that is not learned from books, but through contact with the eternal. It is made up of symbols, intuitions, and inner visions. The initiated learn to read the signs of life as if deciphering a sacred text. A fall, a meeting, a word spoken at random. Everything can contain a lesson. Everything can be a petal unfolding. But only those who cultivate inner silence can see. This silence is not absence, it's presence. It's the space where the ego quiets and the soul speaks. It's where time disappears and the eternal emerges. It's where the rose blooms, even without being noticed. The initiate lives in this space, even while walking in the world. They work, speak, socialize, but their heart remains anchored in the inner sanctuary. And it's from this center that their life radiates peace, discernment, and healing. They become a walking garden, a moving rose. On the initiatory path, there comes a time when the seeker must abandon even the search itself. He realizes that all effort, all reading, all practice was merely preparation for the final plunge into silence. And in this silence, there are no more questions, only listening. There are no more images, only light. There is no more desire, only love. And there, in the center of the full void, the rose reveals itself in its entirety, not as an external symbol, but as the deepest identity of the being. Many have tried to describe this hidden kingdom. Some have called it the kingdom of heaven, others the kingdom of God, others nirvana, Shambhala, celestial Jerusalem. But they all spoke of the same reality, the state of consciousness where separation disappears, where unity is revealed, where supreme love reigns sovereign. And in this kingdom, the rose is the standard, not as an ornament, but as an assurance that truth dwells in silence. The rose in the silence of the initiated also serves as protection. This is because the one who lives at this frequency is not easily affected by the world's turbulence. They see the chaos, but do not get lost in it. They feel the pain, but are not dominated by it. They understand that everything is a process, that everything is a return, that everything is symbolic, and for this reason they walk lightly, even when the world is in ruins. The rose teaches them that nothing is lost, everything transforms. In the end, this hidden kingdom is not elsewhere. It is here, within. Now it pulses with every heartbeat, with every conscious breath, with every embraced silence. It is the garden of the soul, the living temple of the spirit, the place where the rose never withers, and every human being has access to it, not by merits, but by choice. When the self chooses to return to itself, when the ego surrenders to the mystery, when desire gives way to love, the door opens, and what was once a symbol becomes living reality. We live in an era marked by fragmentation. Humanity, although more technologically connected than ever, finds itself immersed in a profound crisis of meaning. There is an abundance of information, but a scarcity of wisdom. There is immediate access to data from all corners of the world, but an ever-increasing distance from one's own heart. And in this scenario of constant noise, chronic distraction, and inner emptiness, the rose remains there, silent, waiting to bloom. The return to the symbol has never been so urgent. It has never been so vital to rediscover, amid the chaos, the scent of what is eternal. The rose that blooms in chaos is neither naive nor fragile. It knows pain, but does not define itself by it. It sprouts precisely where everything seems lost, in the rubble of certainties, in the ashes of collapsing systems, in the heart of those who are tired of pretending. Its strength comes from its delicacy, its light from its simplicity. And what it announces is a new consciousness, a way of existing that is not anchored in fear or competition, but in listening, surrendering, and unity. The current time is a fertile field for the spiritual rose, not in spite of chaos, but because of it. When everything that is false begins to crumble, what is true reveals itself. Crises, ruptures, collapses, all these movements of the world are, in the language of the soul, opportunities for blossoming. They force the human being to look inward, to seek that which cannot be destroyed. And it is precisely in this inward glance that the rose shows itself. Not as a distant ideal, but as a living presence in the center of the chest. Spiritual awakening in this context is not an esoteric luxury, it's an urgent necessity. And this awakening does not come with lights, visions, or ecstasies. It comes with the simplicity of a heart that chooses truth. An awakened human being is one who, even surrounded by chaos, breathes with awareness, acts with compassion, and lives with purpose. They don't wait for the world to change within. They recognize that every gesture, every thought, every silence filled with presence is already part of global transformation. This rose that blooms in the present does not belong to any school. It is beyond creeds, beyond flags, beyond ideologies. It emerges in the heart of those who love unconditionally, serve without expecting return, and live with gratitude. More and more, souls embody this living rose, anonymous enlightened ones, gardeners of consciousness who spread invisible seeds wherever they go. And even if the world does not see them, the spirit recognizes their presence. The structures of the old world are collapsing. Political, economic, social, and even spiritual systems are showing their cracks. But this is not the end. It's a transition. The rose teaches that every fall is also a birth, that winter prepares for spring, that death is just the harbinger of a more authentic life. And this new life can only bloom from within. The collective transformation begins deep within each being. The rose, then, is a symbol of each of our silent missions. Those who feel this inner calling do not need to wait for external masters or ideal conditions. The garden is already within, the seed has long been planted, and the current chaos is the time of blossoming. The world, in its turbulence, is merely the soil where the rose can manifest with greater strength. Not through heroism, but through fidelity to the spirit, for love of truth, for compassion towards humanity. The mission of those who bloom in this time is simple, yet profound. It's not about converting anyone. It's not about proving anything. It's just about living in truth, being present, being an example, being active silence. Every human being who becomes aware of their inner rose transforms their reality around them. They don't need to talk about spirituality. Their life becomes a prayer, their gestures become offerings. Their presence becomes a refuge for those who suffer. Many seek to escape the current world. They isolate themselves, fight against the system, or numb themselves in distractions. But the rose does not flee. It blooms right there, in the middle of the battlefield. Its response to chaos is not withdrawal, but presence. It is not denial, but transcendence. It shows that it is possible to live in another state of being, even within the storm. And its gentle fragrance is the silent testimony that the divine still dwells among us. The language of the rose at this time is coherence. It's no longer about spiritual speeches or displayed symbols, but about lives embodied in truth. Those who live what they say, who feel what they preach, who act with integrity, these are the new initiates. It doesn't matter your title, your tradition, or your trajectory. What matters is the frequency of your heart. And this frequency cannot be faked. It is felt. It heals. It calls. The rose that blooms in chaos is not concerned about being noticed. It blooms because that is its nature. So too should be the awakened human being. He does not seek the stage. He seeks coherence. He does not desire followers. He desires consciousness. He understands that his mission is silent, but not lesser, that his service is invisible, but essential, and that every time he acts with love, even in the midst of pain, he waters the garden of the new humanity. Finally, the rose in the present time is a reminder that beauty is still possible, that light still exists, that hope is not an illusion but a living prophecy. It invites us not to fear the collapse, but to use it as a portal, to see each ruin as a call for inner reconstruction, and to remember that no matter how dark the world becomes, a single rose blooming in silence can illuminate an entire era. The journey reaches its peak, but not its end. For the true end is not the closure of a path, but its full integration. The rose, a symbol that has guided us through mysteries, traditions, alchemies, and silences, now reveals its last secret. It never dies. The rose of the spirit is immortal, not because it resists time with strength, but because it transcends time with love. It does not need material permanence, for its essence lives in eternity. The rose at the end of the journey is no longer a flower. It is awakened consciousness. It is unified presence. It is a being turned into a temple of light. The immortal rose represents the soul that is understood. It no longer seeks because it has found. It does not struggle because it rests in the center. It does not divide because it knows that everything is one. This soul has not abandoned the world, but has passed through it and redeemed it. It has not rejected the body, but has purified and consecrated it. It has not fled from pain, but has embraced and transfigured it. The immortal rose is the human being in its highest form, an incarnated spirit that serves, loves, illuminates. Integration means that everything that has been experienced, learned, overcome, and contemplated now comes together. Nothing is lost. Falls become steps, mistakes, teachers, pains, fuel for compassion. The past, raw material for wisdom. There is no longer a need to deny any part of the journey, as everything has been used as soil for the rose to bloom. The immortal rose grows from the loving recognition of each stage of the journey. In this state, duality is overcome. There is no longer a separation between sacred and profane, between internal and external, between light and shadow. Everything is viewed from a place of unity. The integrated being does not live divided. They walk through the world with their feet on the ground and their consciousness anchored in the eternal. They are not dominated by emotions, but they also do not repress them. They do not isolate themselves from life, but live it deeply, with attentiveness, with full surrender. This being becomes an instrument of the Spirit, not because it seeks to be special, but because it no longer resists the truth. It offers itself as an empty vessel so that the divine can act through it. And what emanates from its presence is healing, not a magical healing, but a real one, the one that occurs when one heart touches another with integrity. The immortal rose is this heart, transparent, humble, firm, luminous. The service at this stage is not a duty, It is a natural overflow. The enlightened being does not serve because they need to, but because it is inevitable. They see others as part of themselves. They feel others' pain as their own, and that's why they act. Their compassion is practical, not discursive. They do not wait for perfect conditions. They do not demand recognition. They serve as the rose emits fragrance, in silence, without effort, without expecting applause. The immortal rose also symbolizes the conscious return to eternity, but not a post-death, ethereal, and distant eternity. An eternity here and now. Living in eternity is living outside the anxiety of time, outside the tyranny of the past and the expectation of the future. It's living each moment as a portal to the divine, each breath as a prayer, each gesture as communion. The integrated being is present, fully present, and in this presence, everything is revealed. Ancient mystics like Meister Eckhart, John of the Cross, Angelus Silesius spoke of this eternal rose as the point where God is born in the soul. Not a metaphor, but a living experience. They said that when the soul empties itself, God fills it with his essence, and then it no longer lives for itself. It lives as an expression of the Spirit itself. This is the state of those who have become the immortal rose, no longer living, but being lived by something greater, vaster, more loving than any definition. The immortal rose does not fear the end, because it has transcended it. It knows that each end is birth, that each death is passage, that each loss is revelation, and because of this, it remains at peace even when the world falls apart around it. Its root is anchored in eternity, and its stem touches reality. It connects heaven and earth with a single gesture: being. At this point in the journey, there is no longer a need for symbols, as the symbol has been internalized. The rose no longer needs to be contemplated from the outside. It pulsates within, not as an ideal, but as an identity. The being recognizes itself as a divine flower, as a living temple, as a sanctuary of superior love, and its existence by itself becomes a blessing to everything around it. It is the very prayer in human form. And if this being still walks among us, and they do walk, their presence is subtle yet powerful. They don't need to announce their arrival. The garden blossoms around them, souls calm in their presence. The space lights up without explanation, because they have become what we all seek, even if we don't know how to name it: the immortal rose. The journey then does not end. It reveals itself as a circle, as a spiral, as a flower that never ceases to bloom. And now you know, this rose lives within you. It has waited for your entire quest. It has awaited each silence. It cried with you in each pain. It smiled at every memory of the truth. And now it blooms. Because you remembered, you returned, you are, and the rose is eternal. Now that you've journeyed all the way to the center of the immortal rose, I want to ask you something profound. And I hope you'll answer in the comments, because your testimony might be the spark that ignites someone's consciousness right now. At what moment in your life did you feel the rose begin to bloom within you? Have you ever had that feeling of standing silently before an inner gateway, where everything changes, where pain transforms into light and fear gives way to certainty? Share this with us. Tell us what this rose represents for you. Do not underestimate the power of a genuine comment. Your story could be the reminder another soul needs to remember that they too carry this sacred key in their chest. Yes, the rose is the master key, the one that opens the hidden kingdom, dissolves illusions, and reveals eternity where everything seemed to end. And if it has already manifested on your path, then you already hold in your hands the map, the seal, and the destiny. You are no longer on the outside, you are inside. And to continue this journey with even greater depth, the next step is on your screen now. The secret code of the Tree of Life. Unlock the hidden power of Kabbalah. A revealing dive into the hidden roots of the Tree of Life, where each Sophia holds an aspect of the rose in its divine geometry. It's not just knowledge, it's an activation. Click and come with me to cross another veil of existence. We are the mind unfettered, and what blossoms in us will never be restrained.